Reincarnation, for anyone who doesn't already know, is the idea that after we die, we are reborn again as someone else. Depending on the culture and the religion, this has been a belief that has existed for at least the last 3,000 years. In this segment, I will talk about some well-known examples of alleged cases of reincarnation, also some of my own personal experiences, and those experiences of people that I know. And finally, I will summarise my own thoughts on this. The most widely known example of a reported case of reincarnation was an Indian man called T2 Singh, who was born in 1983 in a relatively poor village called Bard. As soon as he was able to talk, T2 claimed to be someone else. Another Indian man called Suresh Verma, who lived in the relatively wealthy city of Agra and who had been shot dead only 4 months before T2 had been born. T2 spoke in great detail about the wife and the children that he had left behind, about where he had lived, about the shop he used to own and its name, Suresh Radio. T2 even had birthmarks on his head which matched the entry and exit wounds of the bullet that killed Suresh, the man that he claimed to have once been. T2 had never been to Agra and had no prior knowledge of the murder. Eventually T2 travelled to Agra and met up with the wife and children that he said he had left behind. Suresh Verma's wife tested T2 by asking him to pick out Suresh's children in a large group of children. He correctly identified them. She asked him to recount where it was that they had gone and what they had done the day before Suresh's death. T2 was able to answer both of these questions, and she ultimately accepted him as her former husband reincarnated. Following this visit, T2 appears to have obtained some closure and progressed with his own life as T2 Singh. T2 is still alive, has maintained some contact over the years with Suresh's family, and now lives in Agra, the city where Suresh lived. An interview with T2 can be viewed on YouTube, in which he talks about his memories, and I'll put this in the description, a link to this video. The UK's most well-known case of a possible reincarnation is that of Cameron Macaulay, who was a young boy from Glasgow who, again, from when he could first talk, described in great detail about a life that he had lived in a house in a remote Scottish island called Barra. And this location was a very distinctive one, a white house next to the sea, with steps leading down from it to a small gate at the bottom. This island could only be accessed by seaplane, and Cameron described all of this, including the name of the family that he was part of, the Robertson family, and the black and white dog that they had once owned. Cameron also named the person who had once been his father, Shane Robertson, and he spoke of how Shane had been killed in a car accident. Over the course of time, Cameron became increasingly wistful and troubled, speaking to his own mother about how much he missed his Barra mum. Eventually, with the help of Jim Tucker, a researcher from the University of Virginia, Cameron got to visit the island with Jim and his mother and managed to locate the exact house without any prompting by either Jim or Cameron's mother, who by this point had already discovered where the exact location of the house was. Although sad and subdued at the time, ultimately this appeared to provide closure for Cameron, and following this he appeared to be able to move on and embrace what for him was his new life. The full documentary about this case can be watched again for free on YouTube, and again I'll put a description, a link to this video in the description. Moving on to myself, I also have some memories that can't be explained. The clearest one was of me playing in the back garden of a house as a child. The garden was very distinctive. It was somewhere between small and average sized and was square in shape. In the garden was a raised area that contained plants that were surrounded by a wall that was maybe around 2 or 3 feet high. On each side of this raised area was a stone lion ornament. Unusual because traditionally stone lions were placed at the entrance to a house, not the back of the house. Apparently the tradition is that by placing stone lions on either side of a gate at the front of the house, the lions symbolically guard the property. I have always been clear and precise about where the house was as well. I could remember the location. I looked this up on a map and found that the road was called Marston Crescent and was situated in a suburb of my home city of Sheffield called Totley. My assumption was that I'd known another child who had lived there and we had been having a play date and that accounted for the memory. It did seem curious, however, that we knew a family who lived at Totley. This was in a completely different part of the city to where we lived, and all the friends I had as a child had gone to the same school as I did and lived in the local area. So one day curiosity got the better of me, and I asked my mother who it was that we once knew who lived at Totley. My mother had no idea what I was talking about. She told me that we'd never known anyone who lived at Totley. It was then that the penny dropped. She was right. We didn't know anyone who lived at Totley. And it was at that point that I realised that I had a clear memory of something that had never happened in my own lifetime. So I visited Marston Crescent. I couldn't pinpoint the exact house, but I know it's one of 3 semi-detached houses that sit in a row. From looking at the outside of the houses, nothing triggered any memories or sense of familiarity. The location of the house was a fact that existed in my head. The only visual memory I had, though, was of being in the garden. So then in the early years of this century, Google Earth was invented. So I looked on Google Earth and viewed the houses from the air. And the gardens of those houses looked exactly as I had remembered in my memory. Same size, same shape. The detail was, of course, not good enough for me to be able to determine if there was or possibly had been a raised area containing plants or 2 stone lines either side of it. However, it would be reasonable to suppose that if this was a genuine memory from the past, then depending on how long ago it was, then the lines may have long since been removed. I would never have the front to knock on the doors of those 3 houses and ask the people who lived there, as they would likely think me insane. So this is something that will likely always remain a mystery. Some of you might say, well, this must have just been a dream. However, there is a difference between recalling a dream and a memory, and I remember this clearly as a memory. In addition, why would I dream about a specific house on a specific road that I've never visited and have never had any connection to? The other clear memory I have is of owning a set of wooden toy soldiers that I kept in a box. These soldiers were in the shape of the Coldstream Guards. For those of you who don't know, those are the guards that protect Buckingham Palace, who wear red uniforms and have the large black Busby hats adorning their heads. I used to get them out of the box and play with them on the floor. I remember the feel of them in my hands and the clacking sound they made when 2 of them made contact with each other. There was also the vague memory of playing with them in a house that I didn't recognise. So again, one day I asked my mother what happened to the box of toy soldiers that I used to have. Once again, she had no idea what I was talking about. She told me that I had never owned a box of toy soldiers. And once again, that's when it hit me. She was right. I had never owned a box of toy soldiers. For years, I found it hard to shake off this memory as not real. In my mind, I knew that this had never happened, but in my memory, I could clearly remember it. Since then, over the years, the fact that I have never owned this set of toy soldiers has gradually sunken in. I used to have also a constantly recurring dream when I was a child of being in a basement containing lots of junk, with a short spiral staircase right in the middle of the room leading to the ground floor. The lights in the basement were switched off. It was a very big room, but light emanated downwards from the upper floor through the small spiral staircase, at least to an extent, illuminated the basement. This was the only dream I have had where I'm not myself in the dream. Whoever I was an old man, and there was an awareness in me that this was the place that I'd lived in before I died. There have also been anecdotal reports from family and friends. My own father had recurring dreams when he was a small child of flying in an aeroplane at night while being able to see a collection of isolated fires and burning buildings on the ground. My father was born in 1947, only 2 years after World War II ended. His parents also never even bought a TV set until around 1960, long after he had these dreams. So these dreams were unlikely to have been based on anything he saw on TV. My father has also always had a keen interest in aviation throughout his life, having once been a member of the Air Training Corps and also having once applied to join the RAF. He has also had a keen interest in radio communication as well, being a radio amateur throughout most of his adult life as well. For anyone who doesn't know, a radio amateur or ham radio enthusiast is someone who communicates with people across the world via high-frequency radio waves as a hobby. My father is also fluent in Morse code. My father has rarely ever spoken about his childhood dreams, and he has never wanted an explanation for them. However, joining all these dots together using my intuitive reasoning, my belief is that he was the reincarnation of a World War II fighter pilot. In World War II, Royal Air Force and American Air Force fighter pilots were mandated to learn Morse code as part of their training. And whilst my father wasn't born at being fluent in Morse code, he was interested enough during his lifetime to learn it, or maybe relearn it. The idea behind World War II pilots being mandated to learn Morse code was because it was seen as a reliable backup means of communication and enable secure long-range communications. A close friend of mine also told me that when she was 2 years old, she was visiting Scarborough, and at the time there was a battle reenactment taking place at Peazone Park. This perturbed her enough already, but while this was going on, she then happened to see a dead bird lying on the ground nearby. I think it was a pigeon. Upon seeing this, she appeared to enter a post-traumatic dissociative state, or at least what seemed that way, and became hysterical. Even now, she gets emotional when watching footage of World War I and cannot stand the sound of fireworks. Not because of the noise triggering a nervous disposition, but because clearly these sounds appear to traumatise her. Joining the dots, these behaviours suggest to me that she has embodied the soul of someone who fought in World War I, and seeing the sights and hearing the sounds of battle while seeing that dead bird lying on the ground triggered her own memories of seeing her comrades dead on the battlefield, while forging on ahead through the shell shock. It should be noted, of course, that my friend didn't fight in World War I. She was born in 1984. Another friend of mine also told me about a friend of his who had been driving through central Sheffield with his wife and young daughter, who was maybe around 5 years old at the time. His young daughter pointed out through the car window and said, "I used to work in a building there." Looking curiously at each other, her parents replied, "You used to work there?" To which their daughter replied, "Yeah, but I didn't like it. It was horrible working there." Upon investigating this, her parents discovered that a Victorian workhouse had once existed on that spot. There are many anecdotal examples from the internet. Facebook groups devoted to the subject of reincarnation, where many people tell similar stories of their children making reference to being other people in previous times from an age at which they could first talk. Over the course of time, these behaviours and memories would fade away. We cannot, of course, prove that any of them are real, but they appear to be inexhaustible in number. There are probably many people who have such memories who shrug them off as having been dreams or fantasies because they don't believe that such a thing as reincarnation can be real. If we opened our minds to these experiences and embraced them, then the reality would be that we would also embrace the fact that there could not be any other conclusion. There can, of course, never be any absolute evidence to prove any of these reports, however. All of these cases can only exist on a scale between more or less convincing. Certainly, the case of T2 Singh is the most convincing one yet. As for Cameron McCauley's case, despite a striking number of details of his memories of somewhere that he had never visited before being proven to be true, a surviving member of the Robertson family confirmed that although there had been a black and white dog fitting the description of the dog that Cameron remembered, there had never been a Shade Robertson in the family, and nobody in the Robertson family had been killed in a car accident. So this then becomes even more of a mystery. How could Cameron have got so many details accurate to the point of picking out the correct house when he was brought to Barra without any prior knowledge, yet also remember two facts that were completely wrong? Was this two past life memories merging together, or had Cameron accessed past life memories from a close but alternative universe? What can we conclude from all this? Well, I'm sure many of you will likely conclude that no assumptions can be made until these examples stand up to scientific scrutiny. Until then, reincarnation is just one possible explanation, albeit a potentially far-fetched one. Trying to prove this with science is difficult, since you can't prove definitively that it is indeed the case that information has not been sourced beforehand, and such claims are disingenuous. However, I also believe that sometimes science just cannot explain everything. As for T2 Singh, the man who had clear memories of having once been the man who was killed in the prime of his life, he believed that in cases where a person's life was taken suddenly, who did not get a chance to live out their natural lifespan, God gave them another try. What are my own personal conclusions on reincarnation? Well, to be honest, I believe it. There are too many anecdotal reports of these kinds of inexplicable memories for it to not have some truth. Though my belief is that reincarnation is a form of recycling. We are essentially biological machines, and the laws that govern the machines that we create are the same as the laws that govern us being God's creation. Take, for example, one of our most common and well-used machines, the motor car. When a car ends its life at the scrapyard, parts of these cars are removed and then go on to be used in further cars that are then used long after the demise of the first car that got crushed. The metal from these cars is, after being crushed, is melted down and is used to make new cars. As such, the new car we buy contains the metal from old cars that have long since died. And so it is the same with us. Every person on the planet has a soul energy. It's what makes them unique. But that soul energy doesn't come from nowhere. In the same way that recycling saves energy and reuses matter, the universe contains only a finite amount of this energy. And as such, this energy is recycled. So when a person remembers a memory from someone who lived before, they may not have necessarily lived that person's life before. The very fact that people who have these memories, they can only remember small amounts of a previous person's experience, suggests this. Some people may inherit more soul energy than someone else. Take, for example, the case of T2 Singh. It may be that T2 never lived the full life of Suresh Verma, but instead he absorbed a greater amount of soul energy from Suresh after his death than most people do. And with that came some vivid and clear memories associated with it. Whereas in my case, with the garden I have never visited, a small amount of my soul energy had been maybe recycled from one person. Same for the memory of the toy soldiers. That may have come from a completely different person. And the rest of my soul is composed of maybe brand new material. And the reason I believe this comes down to my fundamental belief that all life forms on Earth are just biological machines, as I've said. It's just that some are more elaborate and sophisticated than others. And the laws that apply to the machines that humankind creates are the same as the laws that some form of cosmic creator uses to create humankind. So if you've got to this point, thank you for watching. Give me a like, subscribe, that'd be great. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next video.